If I had a nickel for every time there was a fantasy anime that was also an isekai that featured a monstrous main character in more ways than one that starts a village and becomes a teacher, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but like, why do I have 2? Also, the comparisons go much deeper than that. I know I'm late to the party, but the reason I'm making this video is because I am currently watching Tsukimichi Moonlit Fantasy Season 2, a show of which I very much enjoyed Season 1 of. But as I am almost wrapped up with watching Season 2, I have been very disappointed. Season 1 was enjoyable, fun, and lovable. Season 2 has been boring, downright bad at times, and confusing. I decided I wanted to make a video expressing my disappointment with the series, but instead of just flinging mud at it for 10 to 20 minutes, I decided I wanted to compare it to another very similar series. That series being That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. But as I started to compare the 2 series, I realized they are way more similar than I initially thought. Which makes for an even better comparison since Tsukimichi has done nothing but let me down since Season 2, while the Slime Isekai is one of my absolute favorite series and I am dying for more seasons to be made. But before throwing stones at Tsukimichi, let's go over these crazy similarities that I found. Also, huge disclaimer, while comparing these 2 series for the remainder of this video, in no way, shape, or form am I implying that one or both of them has plagiarized the other. They both just happen to be fantasy isekai series centered around starting and raising a village. You're bound to have some similarities. There are actual examples of blatant plagiarism in the anime and manga industries, but that is not the point of this video. I am just comparing 2 similar anime, one of which I adore and one that has let me down. Let's get to it. First, I want to go over something I didn't know prior to researching for this video, the background of both series. And by background, I mean how both series came to be. Essentially, the timeline from initial source material all the way to Season 1 of each respective series. First, let's take a look at the Slime Isekai. The Slime Isekai initially started out as a web novel written by Fuse. The web novel debuted on February 20th, 2013 on the website Shosetsuka ni Naro. It would later be picked up as a light novel in 2014 by Micro Magazine. Following the light novel, it would later be picked up as a manga series by Kodansha on March 26, 2015. This brings us all the way to Season 1 of the anime, which debuted on the station Tokyo MX on October 2nd, 2018, and is currently licensed in the West by Crunchyroll. Now if we shift our gaze on over to Tsukimichi, it also started as a web novel written by Kei Izumi. The web novel debuted in 2012 on the website Shosetsuka ni Naro. It would later be picked up as a light novel series in 2013 by Alpha Polis. The web novel was also moved to Alpha Polis at the same time. Alpha Polis would then later go on to release Tsukimichi as a manga series in 2015. This leaves us with our largest gap yet and brings us all the way to Season 1 of the anime, which debuted on the station Tokyo MX on July 7th, 2021 and is currently licensed by Crunchyroll in the West. Now if I move my ugly mug out of the way, and for those of you that were paying attention, we can see these timelines are very similar. The only differences being the actual dates as well as the companies behind some of these decisions. What surprised me the most is that Tsukimichi actually predates the Slime Isekai, with the Slime Isekai making up that ground by releasing its light novel within the same year and Season 1 of its anime 3 years before Tsukimichi. As I said, I initially thought these shows were very similar, but I was surprised to learn they had very similar, if not almost identical, upbringings. Also, there isn't any deeper meaning here, and I'm not claiming there is any foul play at work. I just thought it was interesting that 2 similar series rose up at the same time as each other. But now we move on to the meat of the similarities, the main characters of both series. Once again, let's first take a look at the Slime Isekai and its main character Rimuru. The obvious one is that he is the main character of the Slime Isekai. Rimuru starts off in the beginning as quote-unquote weak. He has really OP abilities that make him gain power very quickly, but he starts out as technically weak. His absolute first friend in the new fantasy world is a dragon, and a powerful one at that. Rimuru, as the series title implies, is a literal monster since he is just a slime. Early on in the series, he starts his own village, and with said village becomes a champion of sorts for the monsters of the world. To fund and help expand this village, he tries his hand with commerce and trade. As the series goes on, he starts to distrust humans, or at least their nations. Further on in the series, he becomes a teacher at a school, and just for the fun of it, he is mostly uninterested in love but is still prone to some down bad moments. Shifting the list to the other side, we can focus on the MC of Tsukimichi, Makoto. As I just stated, he is obviously the main character of his series. Makoto technically is very strong to start, but because he doesn't know how to do anything, he is weak to begin. One of the first friends he makes is a dragon who also happens to be very powerful. While not a demi-human, Makoto is so plain looking that humans often mistake him for one. Pretty early on, he starts his own village where he becomes a champion for the demi-humans of the world. To fund and expand said village, he tries his hand at commerce and trade by fronting as a merchant. He distrusts humans, especially as the series goes on. He later becomes a teacher at a school, and he shows even less interest in love but is still subjected to the down bad virus at times. Putting these two lists side by side is actually crazy, especially since I could have drilled down even deeper if I really felt like it. This totally makes sense though, since both Rimuru and Makoto are my favorite characters in both series. Rimuru was a breath of fresh air when it comes to MCs in isekai anime when he graced our screens back in 2018. Instead of just being a boring and blank self-insert character like most isekai MCs are, he actually has a heart and soul to him. He has true charisma in his tool belt, which makes it believable when all the different parties begin to enter his service. Makoto is also a well-crafted MC in my opinion. He truly cares for his companions. As the series continues on, he shows that he has a calm and calculating mind required to protect and nurture his friendships as well as the village. The biggest downside to Makoto, however, is how much better of a character he is than all the other characters in Tsukimichi. This only serves to further display how boring, bland, and downright forgettable most other characters are in the series. Rimuru is actually a better character in my opinion, but because the Slime Isekai is better built up and written, he actually holds up the rest of the cast and helps to make them shine. Tsukimichi, however, has Makoto, and if he's not around, the other characters are unbearably forgettable. Well, except Tomoe, but let's get into that. Spoiler alert, this is where the similarities start to weaken or straight up end. Also, I'm gonna try to speed things up a bit. Let's take a look at who I would consider the main side characters of both series. With the Slime Isekai, we have Shion and Shuna. Both of them love Rimuru. Both of them are the obvious main love interests. They fight each other over said love, and one is more traditionally feminine than the other. Shifting our focus to Tsukimichi, we have Tomoe and Mio. Both of them love Makoto. Both of them are the obvious main love interests. They fight each other over said love, and one is more traditionally feminine than the other. Obviously, I am oversimplifying this comparison, but you get the point. Shion and Shuna are some of the best shining examples of the absolutely stacked sidecast that resides in the Slime Isekai. As a viewer, I care about both of these characters deeply, and that is evident by how I felt when later spoilery things happen. Both characters also have plenty of moments that let them shine even without the guiding care of Rimuru. And now the mud throwing begins. Tomoe is a pretty good character in my opinion, nothing crazy but pretty good. She has charisma and charm that make you like her from just her personality. She also has a handful of shining moments in the series, a few of which Makoto wasn't even involved in. Sadly, she is the only character that has a shining moment without Makoto being directly involved. Mio, on on the other hand isn't a bad or forgettable character like the rest of the cast, but she isn't that great either. She doesn't really do much unless Makoto is directly involved, and the only reason I elevate her higher than the rest of the cast is honestly just because she's a very sweet and cute character. Now let's move on to the rest of the side cast. I'm just gonna throw up the side cast comparisons since it's not even fair to compare them at this point. The Slime Isekai has numerous endearing and lovable characters. Characters like Malim, Diablo, Veldora, Benimaru, Ronga, Soe, Gopta, Gabiru, and so many others. Most, if not all of these characters have their moment or moments to shine, oftentimes without needing Rimuru to be involved. These characters serve actual roles and purposes oftentimes long after they are initially introduced. Tsukimichi, however, is pretty bleak. Basically, the entire side cast is either bad or forgettable, with most of them being forgettable, which is even worse than being bad. You basically just have Shiki and Emma. Shiki is almost on par with Mio, but can sometimes fade into the background. Emma started off as a pretty good character, but quickly gets turned into the village lore dumper whenever Makoto is away from the village for too long. The entire rest of the cast is downright forgettable. I didn't even recognize like half of the characters when I was scrolling through the list on Mal. Some of them are decent or even pretty good when they are introduced, but then immediately fade into irrelevance as soon as their introduction or arc is over. The Slime Isekai cast only improves upon and breathes life into the other aspects of the show, while the Tsukimichi sidecast drags the rest of the show into the mud. One of those aspects is the commerce and trade that is put on display within both shows. The Slime Isekai actually has less of a focus on the business side of things, but in my opinion handles it better. The trading makes sense and always seems to further the plot of the village, especially once he begins to trade with other nations. It has actual purpose and you can literally see it directly correlate to the expansion of the village. Tsukimichi, however, actually puts more focus on the business side of things, with Makoto fronting as a merchant but handles it poorly. The trade put on display is very basic and rudimentary and refuses to get more in depth. Oftentimes, the trading feels like it's done for no reason at all, since we never really see it directly impact the village it's supposed to be funding. Well, to be honest, we never even really see the village in Tsukimichi, or at least the whole village. Which leads us into the last comparison topic, the villages. The village in the Slime Isekai, which later becomes its own whole entire nation, in more ways than one can almost be considered the true main character of the series. It initially starts out as a humble goblin village led by Rimuru, but we see it evolve and expand over time into a bustling nation that wants to make its claim in the world. Each race of monster that joins the fold improves upon something within the village, expanding it in a way that feels natural to the progression of the plot. As the village expands, so does Rimuru's power and influence. As the viewer, we want the village to succeed, so much so that I almost care more when the village is facing a threat than when Rimuru is. The demi-human village Makoto starts in Tsukimichi is nothing like what I just described. It gets its humble beginnings in a very similar fashion to Rimuru's village, but never truly expands on itself or makes the viewers truly care about it. Part of this is sadly because we never truly see the village in its entirety, or at least see it in a meaningful way. Instead of visually seeing the village expand, we are told so by the village lore dumper Emma. When new races join the fold, it's not entirely clear how they expand upon and benefit the village. We are just told that they are helping, and Emma quickly and casually explains how the village is flourishing. When the village is put under threat, it's very hard as a viewer to truly care about what happens to it or the citizens. This also affects the overarching plot and how much the viewers care about what Makoto is doing at any given moment. We can see that Makoto truly does care about the village, and almost everything he does is for the sake of the village, but because we don't care about the village, it's hard to care about things that Makoto is doing. After going through that long-winded comparison, I want to reconfirm something. I did in fact enjoy season 1 of Tsukimichi and wanted nothing more than to enjoy season 2, but it let me down. I thought Tsukimichi had a decent season 1 that set it up in a way that it could hopefully reach some of the same heights that the Slime Isekai has reached. But unfortunately, it never started to climb and instead started to sink to new lows. The Slime Isekai flourishes with its excellent main character, one of the best side casts in all of anime, and takes the concept of starting a village and knocks it out of the park. So much so that, as I stated earlier, you could almost consider the village the main character of the series. But with Tsukimichi, outside of Makoto and even some of the stuff he does, it's boring, bland, unoriginal, lifeless, and downright stupid at times. Will I continue watching Tsukimichi once season 3 drops, since it's already been confirmed? Yeah, probably. But that's not really saying much because I watch almost anything and don't really drop many shows. However, if season 3 doesn't turn things around and comes out the gate in this same pathetic manner, then yes, I will be dropping the series. On the bright side, season 3 of the Slime Isekai is currently airing and looks pretty good, so hopefully that series can continue for a long time. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts on the topic. Do you agree with what I said? Do you think I'm over-hating Tsukimichi? Do you think the Slime Isekai is also trash? Which then, like, why did you even watch this video? And while you're down there, go ahead and leave a like, leave a second comment if you want, and subscribe for future content.